Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Commercial Leases and Negotiation, hosted by the City of Los Angeles's Department of Cannabis Regulation. My name is Frank Liu with the Cal Asian Chamber, and I will be the moderator for tonight's event. We are here tonight because the Department of Cannabis Regulation has officially launched the Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance, or BLC program, to assist equity entrepreneurs in the City of Los Angeles with obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This series is part of a broader BLC program efforts, which also include live webinars with different subject matter experts, networking events to connect you with other local LA businesses and industry leaders, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools you can download and use, self-directed online education on important topics related to running a successful cannabis business through the BLC's learning management system, which is usually referred to as the LMS for Verified Social Equity Individuals, and a robust coaching program that connects applicants with seasoned cannabis subject matter experts. We are now dropping a link in the chat now to sign up for these coaching services. Now for the fun and the networking. Please RSVP for the LA Cannabis Unite event at the beautiful Mayfair Hotel on June 17th. The afternoon of this event will feature a supply chain speed dating from 3 to 5 p.m. You ask, what is this? The goal is to have social equity brands or products on dispensary shelves. The equity operators will have the opportunity to meet with cannabis industry distributors and brands for a chance to pitch their businesses to industry decision makers. Supply chain speed dating is a great way to meet people, crucial to expanding your network and getting your product to consumers. From 5 p.m., the rooftop area will feature a DJ, food, and networking. A no-host bar will be available in the lobby, along with free professional headshots and full access to the DCR resources room. Please use the registration link that we are dropping in the chat right now to RSVP to this great upcoming event. As part of the city's social equity program, DCR has launched the BLC Learning Management System for verified social equity individuals, where you now have access to these recorded webinars and online courses and digital resource made especially for you. Now, before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed after the editing process on the learning management system. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There is an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in the public forum and keep your questions focused on tonight's topic. Please do ask questions about tonight's subject in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to these questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a dedicated Q&A session in the last 15 minutes of tonight's event. You are encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone can see the answers to your questions. And if you have these questions, many other folks likely do as well. And finally, please note that tonight's content was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor constitute legal advice. If you have specific questions outside of tonight's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours to speak to a DCR representative. Now let's transition to tonight's presentation. I am pleased to introduce this evening's subject matter expert, Elias Rodriguez, Associate Vice President of Diodati. Elias is an Associate Vice President at Diodati, working on corporate real estate engagements for Fortune 500s and regional holders of real estate portfolio. In his half-decade with Diodati, he has been instrumental in acting as project manager in over 100 projects with public and corporate clients, such as Foothill Gold Line Construction Authority, Grifols North America, Anita's Foods, Inglewood Park Cemeteries, and Southern California Gas Company. Since 2022, Elias has been a real estate leasing industry 101 advisor on behalf of the Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation, BLC Assistance Program. In this role, he has advised nearly 50 cannabis industry participants in all aspects of commercial real estate leasing. Elias has also advised and successfully negotiated retail leases for cannabis tenants in Los Angeles. Elias is part of a leadership team that has been twice nominated as Brokerage Executive of the Year by the Los Angeles Business Journal and is critical part of the team that was honored as a 2023 Commercial Real Estate Retail Influencer by GlobeST.com. Elias is a graduate of University of California, San Diego, and is a licensed state of California real estate agent. Without further ado, I'd like to ask Elias to join me on screen. Welcome, Elias. Feel free to start sharing your presentation and start your presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. So as Frank mentioned, my name is Elias Rodriguez, and today we'll be going over a couple of different subjects. On our first slide, we'll have the commercial leases and negotiation. This is part one of our presentation. We'll be covering a variety of important topics such as market, negotiation, lease document issues, and we'll assist you in finding and securing the right location for your business. So a little presentation overview of the topics we'll discuss. The first one is industry specific issues. Let's face it, it's a new and exciting time for cannabis retail and production, but with many landlords, brokers, cities, they don't fully understand the full details of the operation, and they probably have pre-existing questions and perceptions as to what it means to negotiate on a cannabis tenant. We'll also be going over the process of negotiating a lease. We'll provide a high-level overview of the commercial real estate leasing process that's specifically tailored to cannabis-related tenants. This will include working with outside professionals such as attorneys, brokers, making sure that you're looking in the right areas for the next location. We'll go over the offer process. In this section, we'll walk you through the traditional offer process, which starts from initiating a letter of intent through the lease document. We'll be going over lease negotiations as well. We'll touch a couple of few components of lease negotiation, but we invite you to stay for the second part of the presentation. We'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. We'll talk about the do's and don'ts. We'll share important nuggets of information that'll help you progress through your process. And we'll also walk you through a couple of pitfalls and mistakes that people usually get along the way. We'll go over site selection best practices. Most individuals own their own cannabis business, and they take it upon themselves to understand what's the right location for their business. In this section, we'll share helpful information and tips that are used by larger corporate retailers to minimize your risk and help you find the best location for your new enterprise. We'll share a couple of resources. We'll detail a couple of resources that this program can provide for you as well. So on to our first topic, it's industry-specific issues. For many years, cannabis sales was associated with illegal activity, while much of it has been accomplished over the last couple of decades in informing the public that there's tons of healing and medicinal benefits of cannabis. Many individuals, mostly landlords and a couple of brokers, they continue to carry a couple of misconstrued and sometimes incorrect fears on onboarding a cannabis tenant. With this in mind, I think it's very helpful to enter the lease process with understanding the following industry issues. The first one is site selection. In most normal cases, site selection, it's an important component because it's going to drive the location that you're going to, and it's going to ask for the clientele of any retail business. With the cannabis industry involved, this is much more complex than your regular retail tenant. It's going to require such things as radius reduction or restrictions, approved cannabis retail zones, building grade, security, access, visibility, and there's a couple other things that you'll have to take into consideration as well. Another person that we'll be dealing with in the specific issues is the landlord. For any real estate investment, the value of the building comes from three general sources: Those sources are the location of the building, the quality of the building, and the quality of the tenant. The last one, the quality of the tenant, it speaks not only to the rent that they're going to be paying, but to the stability of the business, the stability and growth of the industry, and as well as how does the tenant's business complement other tenants within any commercial area or building. From this standpoint, one can see why landlords may think that leasing a space to a cannabis tenant may impact the building value. Some of the fears that these landlords have is it'll drive away tenants and other business. It might bring on dangerous individuals and illicit activity to the building, or it just might bring negative elements to the surrounding community. So we'll discuss on how to kind of counter those. And lastly, you'll be dealing with the community. Cannabis tenants may face a difficult time from the community members and community groups that may oppose any type of cannabis related use within a retail area. And these groups may add a bit pressure to the cities when discussing licensing process. So we'll discuss on how to include the community in this process. So with the full understanding of the various individuals that we'll come in contact with, like the landlords, community members, we'll transition to our next topic that will aid us with these issues. And that's the process of negotiating. So to begin this process, you'll have to select the right team. It's time to select the right team right before engaging any landlord. And what they'll do is assist you in locating, negotiating, and effectively launching your new location. This team's going to have multiple individuals. Some of them may be part of your team. Others may have to be outsourced or hired experts. For this presentation, we're just going to focus on the main players in the leasing process that can assist you in facilitating any type of transaction for leasing. So let's go over the main players. The first ones are going to be real estate brokers and agents. So real estate brokers and agents, they're licensed professionals who can help you buy, sell, and lease any type of real estate on behalf of a landlord, investor, or a tenant like yourselves. While real estate brokers and sales agents license don't specify the area of expertise or their focus, no real estate professional will be able to tell you exactly what they do until you interview them. So ideally, what you're going to want to do is find a reputable commercial real estate firm that focuses on a specific geographic area. With these firms, they're going to be either apartment building, industrial, office, medical, retail building specialists, and some brokerages even have specialists in the cannabis related fields. So for example, if you're doing a retail operation, you're going to want to interview firms that are more in line with retail focused agents. If you're going to do any type of manufacturing operation or distribution, you're going to want to discuss with an industrial specialist instead. So make sure you understand their fee structures when you're discussing with these agents what you want to do. Discuss with them the process of selecting locations and where you need to be. And overall, you just need to feel very, very comfortable with them. It's a big part of the process. You're more than likely going to need an attorney. Although a real estate professional will assist you in identifying any locations and negotiating the business terms of the lease, including the rate per square foot, the rate of escalations, length of the lease, and improvements, they're not legal professionals. So real estate leases, they're going to be legal binding contracts. And it's important that you invest to have some type of attorney who's very familiar with real estate leases to look at the legal terms of the lease, including exit clauses, sublease clauses, insurances, and all that good stuff. There are resources available via the Los Angeles Bar Association that can help you find the right legal professional to assist you. And if you go to www.lacba.org, there'll be a cannabis section that can help you out, and researching through it, you'll be able to kind of figure out what type of attorney you're going to need and who you need to discuss with. Another part of the team is the accountant. So in any lease, landlords, they're going to ask to see some type of evidence or credit worthiness by way of financial statements. Most often, though, landlords will ask for profit and loss statements, balance sheets, or tax returns. While these requests should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, it's important to let an accountant know, or your specific accountant know, that you're in the process of securing a new or expanded lease space and that these requests may arise. So you want to have that prepared before engaging. You'll need a banker on your side. Like your accountant, it may be good to notify your banker that you're in the process of leasing new or expanded space. Your banker will assist you in providing any ledgers, statements, demonstrating bank balances. And in more complex situations, the landlord may require you to have letters of credits to assist in the lease guarantee process. So a banker will be a great help in this spot. Contractors. So this is going to be one of the main players and the last players on your team. So on our first thing, it's important to have a trusted, licensed, and reputable contractor. When you're looking for a space to lease, it'll require some type of small or substantial construction work to get ready to open to the public. So as mentioned, it's very important that you have someone that's trusted and licensed and has good referral fees on that side. And they're going to have to walk the space with you, assess the overall situation of the space, and provide you with estimates onto the amount of any of the work that needs to be done to prepare the space. This will also be important to discuss with them, and you're going to be negotiating some type of TIA or tenant improvement allowance from the landlord. Think of this as credit paid in cash or via waived in rent for the work that's going to be done to the space. So let's go on to the next one. So our next topic is going to be the offer process. So in the Los Angeles market, when you're dealing with reputable commercial real estate professionals, the negotiation process tends to take a couple of steps. In the offering process, there's particularly 4 that you're going to work with. The first one is the letter of intent. This starts with the non-binding letter of intent, or the LOI as they refer to it. And once you approve the LOI, you'll move on to financials and tenant application. So as mentioned, some landlords might require a tenant application, and they'll always require some type of proof of credit worthiness via financial documentation. And we'll go over these in depth a little bit more, which will lead us to our last 2, which is the lease and the lease guarantee. So the groups that negotiate a legally binding lease for form and a lease for guarantee, they're going to will help you provide context on what a lease has and what a lease guarantee and what these do for you. So the letter of intent, it's usually a 2-page document which spells out most of the business terms of the lease, and these are, or at least should be, non-binding. The letter of intent, it's built upon the negotiated terms of the LOI. So while it's non-binding, to change your mind after the LOI terms are negotiated, it might put you through, or if you decide to change your mind of the LOI terms that are negotiated once you're in the thick of the lease negotiation process, it may cost you the space. So whatever it's negotiated up front and then you go into the leases, it may be a bit hard to change those after. It won't leave the landlord very happy. And the LOIs, they tend to follow the main aspects of the deal terms. So namely, who's in leasing it, why they should be leasing it, what's the space or property that they want to lease, how much are they leasing it for how long are they leasing it, and along with this, it's going to include a couple of other terms, or a dozen other terms. We'll discuss these terms in the part 2 of this webinar, and we'll be able to go into those in depth. So one of the first key terms we're going to discuss is the tenant, and that's the person who's leasing it. This will go on to the LOI. We'll also discuss the lease premise. What is being leased? So the space that you're leasing. The size, that's going to be the square footage of the space, so the overall size. The use, in this case, it will be retail cannabis. Right here, we have the term. So the term is the amount of years and the months of the base term lease. So if there's a 3-year lease, it'll be considered a 3 years or a 36-month lease. They're pretty interchangeable. Rent commencement, when the tenant will start paying rent. So the date they start paying rent. The base lease rent. So what does this mean? This is the amount per square foot paid to rent the space, for example. So if the rate offered is $1 per square foot and the space is 100 square feet, the monthly base rent will be about $100 a month. So the way you do it is you just times we'll go back to this. You'll times the square feet by the space and it'll give you your monthly base rent. Triple nets, this is the amount of money that the landlord will charge the tenant for the proportionate share of their property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. So how does that look? If you, for 1,000 square foot space that rents for $1 per square foot, the base rent, and the additional charge for your proportionate stay is 10 cents per square foot, we'll add that over the top, and that'll give us the $1,000 base rent that we discussed, and then the additional 10 cents per square foot, which gives us a total of 1,100. In this part, and we'll discuss this a little bit more in part 2 of the presentation, we'll go over the different types of lease structures and what does a triple net lease really mean. Escalations, this is the amount of rent that will go up by the year, usually shown as percentages anywhere between 2 to 4%, but it depends on the overall market. And this is used to account for the cost of living increases, inflation, and so forth. So for example, if the escalation is 3% per year and the rent is in month 13th of the lease, which is the second year, it will be an extra $103 per month or 3% higher than the previous month or previous term. When discussing in the LOI, sometimes they'll offer options. And what this does is it details any additional terms after the base term of the lease. So for example, if there are 2 one-year options, the tenant has the option to stay in the space for a total of 5 years on a 3-year base term. So if they offer you 3 years and 2+ terms of 1-year options, they give you an additional 2 years. And these options will also be subject to escalation fees. So whatever is negotiated up front. Parking is going to be important in your offer. The number of spaces needed. This is more aligned with the number of spaces that's going to be required by the city for a particular space that you're leasing. For retail, this is usually about 3 to 5 spaces for every 1,000 square feet. So if you, for example, if you take a 2,000 square foot space, the number of parking spaces that will be required is about 6 to 10 spaces. Landlord work, what this means, this is the construction or the improvements the landlord will make to the space prior to handing over the space to the tenant. And then the tenant work is the opposite. It's what's the construction or the improvements the tenant will make to the space that's agreed upon in the lease and the LOI. Free rent, that's those are any months of rent that the tenant will request the landlord to forgive. If there are 2 months of free rent requested and the landlord agrees to it, what that means is the tenant will not have to pay rent during these months that have been agreed. But more often than not, the tenant will still need to pay those additional fees, the triple net or CAM fees for those months. Security deposit, this will be the amount of down payment or deposit needed to enter the lease. And then guarantor. So who will be the guarantee of the lease, basically? Since it is a legal document with financial consideration, the landlords will want to understand the credit that's securing and vouching for the lease. Strong companies with strong financial records, they'll typically enter into a corporate guarantee lease, whereas a new business and their respective owners will be asked to personally guarantee, which means that they'll also have to guarantee their personal assets to the lease. This is a very important component that should be discussed with an attorney, and we'll discuss it a little bit more. And then the financial tenant application. This is not always requested by the landlord, as the LOI and financials should be enough. But since many new tenants are launching their first location, the tenant application will most likely be required to vet you out. So a version of this is going to be included in the resources section of the presentation. This application usually requests the full name and address of the applicant, social security number, used to pull credit reports, and as well as any bank balances and employer information. So, think about this much like a credit application for a credit card or a car loan. So we'll go into leases. So the lease documents is the most important part of the negotiation. Since it is a binding legal document, it's going to carry legal, financial, and operational consequences. This lease typically is anywhere between 6 to 100 pages. It depends on the complexity of the lease, the size of the developer, and the type of building that's in question. The points of negotiation will include all those noted in the letter of intent, plus dozens of other legal clauses that will be detailing items ranging from who's responsible for the maintenance and repairs, to subleasing the space, to what happens if you need to stop operations. And this document will be discussed more in detail in part 2. So as noted, it's highly recommended to negotiate the lease with the help of a legal professional, since there's going to be some legal binding terms in there. The lease guarantee. So in addition to the lease document, it is a binding lease guarantee form that's going to require you, the entity or the individual company owner to guarantee the lease. And it's going to state that he's taking financial responsibility for the amount of rent owed during the base term of the lease in the event that there is a default or a termination. So once again, we highly recommend to negotiate the lease with the help of a legal professional to really understand what you're signing. We'll go into the lease strategy of do's and don'ts. So there are multiple areas along the leasing process where the professionals noted, like the brokers, attorneys, will guide you through doing the best possible thing and avoiding the worst possible scenarios. So much of what we're going to discuss today, they should be secondhand nature to a seasoned professional. So first point, it's important to understand that the good and the bad of the leasing process is you have to understand both sides, because after you sign the lease, it's going to be your responsibility and to upkeep that lease, because once it's signed, you're not on your own, but a lot of the other professionals kind of hand it off to you. So you have to make sure that you know what's upcoming, the timelines and different things. So we'll discuss the do's and don'ts to look out for. First do, hire a professional. There's too much at stake for you. You need to do your homework and ask around to find the best people you need to help you in this particular area. So for a real estate agent, find somebody that's going to do the cannabis, that's very knowledgeable in cannabis and they understand what they're doing. Do your homework when it comes to mind. Understand the business location that you're going to do. Research it heavy, have conversations with the professionals, the landlord in the city, and understand what everybody wants and what's going to leave everyone happy. Understand the market and the customer. You need to understand the location that you're going to operate in. There's going to be resources in this presentation that's going to help you in deciding how you can, where you should go, the cannabis zoning map, and this is going to save you tons of money because up front, you'll just know I need to stick to these areas, not waste any time anywhere else. Understand your market and your customers. So who's the end consumer? Who's going to enter your business establishment? And, kind of put yourself in your customer's shoes. What would they like to see and where would they like to shop? A big do is be as professional and as corporate as possible. The cannabis industry is still relatively young, and there's a lot of people who don't fully understand it. So present your business and yourself in a professional and corporate manner, and it's going to help you go a long way. It's going to be a 5-year lease, and what that means, it could be a 5-year relationship with the landlord. So you have to make a good impression right off the bat. Don't limit yourself to one location. It's always good to have a ton of locations on the side and ensuring that you have a backup plan. Most places that you see, you're more than likely only stick to 1 or 2 because people can get pretty picky and decide this is the best one, but always have a backup plan. So a couple of big don'ts. Don't ignore legal help. A lease is legally binding, and with financial and legal ramifications, it's not to be taken lightly. So even law firms that do not specialize in real estate tend to hire real estate attorneys to review their own leases. Don't forget about potential neighbors. The business next to yours, it's going to be there day in and day out. So you need to approach the space with the fullest respect to all the businesses and make sure that they understand you're coming in and what you're about, because it can make or break your negotiation. Expect a quick process. Don't expect this to be extremely quick. Site selection and the leasing process can take a couple of months to over a year. And, rightfully so, when you place your business in a location, it's going to impact your future. So you really want to decide where you're going to go and really vet out these locations. Sign a lease until you have all licenses in place and connect to the city. So what does this mean? So once you have a lease signed in, you're responsible for all the financial consideration of it, as well as other factors. And you have to triple check with the city that you can operate there, that you're going to be able to get the necessary permits and licenses for that particular location, and know that there's a pathway there. Lastly, another one is don't overpay. This is a big problem that I've seen amongst tons of tenants. They tend to overpay because there's the expectation that cannabis is making a tons of money, that they should pay a premium tenant because they're really, they have a surplus of clients, but that doesn't tend to be the case. So, avoid any landlords who expect you to pay beyond the market space. I've seen people who get gouged almost 40 to 50%, and that's just not fair, and it's not kosher, and it could really limit your relationship with your landlord. So, be very upfront and don't overpay. You have tons of options, so make sure you use them. And don't settle for the wrong location, space, city, or landlord. Patience is key. Leases can run for many years, so it's very critical that you're comfortable with the city you're in, you're comfortable with the landlord you're working with, and overall, you're comfortable with the space you have. Don't forget about parking and access. Your customers, they're going to need to be able to get in and out and also park into your space. So don't overlook the importance of parking simply because the space is approved. So although the space is approved, if it's hard to access, that may deter customers to leave your space. So let's go into the best practices for site selection. So site selection comes before the leasing negotiation, but it goes hand in hand with the overall process. So before you negotiate this space, you need to find the best locations. We're going to present a list of the best practices that should facilitate your process. And please remember that your real estate professional, they should be able to understand these fully and should run their inventory searches based on the parameters you're going to communicate to them. So our first thing is understand where you can operate. This is very important. Cannabis is super restrictive, and from a physical standpoint too. So only certain areas in a select number of cities allow cannabis-related enterprises. So be sure you focus your search on these areas where you're going to be allowed to go, that there's a clear pathway, and don't waste your time on any locations that won't, because time is of the essence. Understand how your clients will get to your location. Is your location going to be easy to get to? Does it have easy parking access? Is there a freeway nearby? Public transportation, all these good things. These are questions you need to ask yourself on a location by location basis to best position your space for success. So understanding these things and how easy access or how easy it is to access your space will be a massive component. And then understanding demographics, density, traffic counts, and other important figures related to the site selection. So the US Census website, as well as other resources, can provide you tons of data on a property by property basis. And this is going to tell you, how many people are living by location, what are their age groups, how many rent versus how many own, as well as things like how many cars pass by, the traffic counts. All of these are going to be great insights, and they're very important to best choose your location. So for example, if your average consumer is 18 to 30 years of age with a college education, you need to focus your search in areas that have these parameters. And your real estate professional should be able to allocate some resources to assist you in finding this information. So it's going to be anything from, Esri to LoopNet and different things like that. Which brings us to our next point. Please look into the research and attachments for the info on the census website. So the census website, it's great to tell you, even by zip code basis, what type of people are there? Does it hit your target demographics? And are you going to be able to meet that community? We'll also want to discuss the landlord viewpoint, right? So things to consider as a potential landlord of a cannabis tenant. So what does this mean? So cannabis-related tenants, they must adhere to more regulatory requirements more than any other retail real estate tenants. There's tons of misconceptions about adding a cannabis tenant to your tenant mix as a single tenant to any of your commercial assets. The matter of fact is that cannabis-related tenants adhere to more regulatory elements more than any other retail use. So by the time that they're negotiating a lease with you, you'd already had gone through multiple approval processes that allows you to act in there. So the landlord should be a little more calm about the whole scenario, because you're working with the city, you're working with attorneys, you have to meet all these different build outs and stuff like that. The cannabis retail build outs, they're very sophisticated and they're thorough, and they tend to add a tremendous value to the building and infrastructure. So there's always been stories of landlords requesting a cannabis tax by a way of higher leasing rate. But we can also say we're building out the whole space. It's going to look good, and you're going to have a higher or a better use space at the end of the time. So it could be a way to combat a higher leasing rate, but at the same time, it'll make the landlord a little more aligned with your use. And lastly, attempt to approach and approve the strength of the tenant without preconceived biases on cannabis-related uses. So what does this mean? So aside from the fact that fair business practices apply to all legal uses, included cannabis-related retail, it's really important to understand that these potential tenants are embarking on a heavy investment to operate out of your business or your building. So it's important to assess them as you would any other tenant without any bias or any preconceived notions about the industry, because you want to ensure that you have a great and lasting, fruitful tenant-landlord relationship. So just like any other tenant, just fill them out the same way. And so we'll shoot over. That's the end of part one. We'll make our way to part two of commercial leases and negotiation. And so we went through what the offering process is, and we can turn to a more crucial part of the operation business, and that's successfully negotiating the lease. So in today's discussion, we're going to follow, or in part two of the discussion, we're going to go over the lease documents, right? So we'll be looking over a couple of samples of lease documents. We'll go over the key elements from the lease structure and specific clauses. We'll discuss, anything that pertains to non-rental costs, to escalation, specific clauses, but it is important, and we strongly recommend that you talk to a legal professional to assist you in reviewing any important documents before signing them. And then the process, our next topic, it goes along with the process of negotiating a lease, is lease management. So, leases tend to be a dynamic contract that change annually based on how they were initially negotiated. So what does this mean? You've signed the lease, now what? We're going to discuss the lease management, and leases tend to be a dynamic contract as mentioned. So we want you to understand the timeline and understand what's coming up next. So lease structure, they vary property by property and landlord type, but typically the leases will be structured in a couple of few ways. So full service leases, they're the most common in office projects. What they typically include is taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, also known as CAM fees, which relate to the share of common areas such as parking lots, walkways, and larger multi-tenants. And these tend to be triple nets or NNN as they know them too, which are to the units and building share of the property taxes. We'll have gross leases, or also known as modified gross. These leases typically affects office and industrial projects. A gross lease rate will include your base year taxes, insurance, and CAMs in the lease rate. It won't be an additional one. But however, it does increase after the first year of the base year. And that usually those increases are passed to the tenant most of the time. Triple net leases, these leases have base rent expenses, with the tenant paying their proportionate share of the operational expenses, such as property taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, which is added on top of the base rent amount. And then there's also percentage leases. So what this means is the landlord, they'll usually charge the base rent, the CAMs and triple nets at times, and on top of that, a percentage of the lease. So what this means is the landlord's entitled to a percentage of the gross sales after a certain point. So you'll have to pay the base rent, the CAM fees, and then there's going to be a amount that they'll set with you and decide, hey, after this, $10,000 months in sales, you'll owe us about 5% of any type of profit. And this is usually done in corporate-owned malls, large shopping centers that typically require a triple net lease, and these tend to be higher traffic areas as well. So lease documents, we'll go into a couple of lease documents. Every lease document is unique. There's to the particular tenant, particular space that you're going to, and under unique set of negotiated terms for a particular landlord. So in other words, every lease document is always going to be unique for the other one. The overarching sets of clauses and terms tend to be fairly standard, but these types still change landlord by landlord. And so you do need a legal professional to kind of walk you through it and ensure that if there was any changes to the clauses, we sort those things out. Landlord forms, many landlords, especially large corporate and institutional landlords, non-mom and pop owners, they're going to have their own lease form. This will be unique to their ownership likes and dislikes, and these forms will still have many, if not most, terms that we'll be discussing here. So commonly seen forms, it'll be the AIR Commercial Real Estate Association lease form, and the other one is the California Bureau of Real Estate Commercial Leases form. These typically are between 15 to 20 pages. The most commonly used one is the AIR Commercial Real Estate form. And the other one is not, the California Bureau of Real Estate lease form, or the CAR form. It's not typically used, but they are seen in more residential transactions. And this is an example of the AIR lease, and I believe we'll have a better example for you at the end. So important elements of the lease contract. The next few slides are going to show different aspects of the presentation or different aspects of the lease and kind of what they entail. And it's going to be a brief overview. It won't be a deep dive, but we invite you to seek a professional's help to kind of explain them to you and how they will affect you. And these clauses and terms, they'll usually be found in the AIR lease. So the first part is parties. It details who the landlord and who they are leasing to. The premise, it details the location of the space and the total amount of square feet. And it's always advised that you measure your space to ensure and confirm that it is the right size. Term, it's the number of years and in months or years that you'll be leasing the space. The commencement date, when the lease starts. The expiration date, it's going to be when the base term ends. Early possession is going to be the date when you can enter the space before the lease starts. So sometimes the landlords will let you enter the space before the lease starts. The base rent, it's the amount you're paying per each rentable square foot per month. And this is usually written in dollars per square foot basis. So base rent and other monies paid upon execution. This area is going to summarize what's due upon execution, and it typically be the sum of, usually the first month or first and last months that's going to be due. And it'll typically have a security deposit. This can be anywhere between 1 month to 3 months of rent. Association fees, any common area fees, and any other fees that the landlord might have. And this is, it changes case by case, but they might add a couple of more fees. The agreed use, you have to be very, very specific about cannabis and THC use. The entity or the insuring party, it's going to be the entity guaranteeing the lease form. Real estate brokers, as we discussed, who represented you. The guarantor, this is the party that's going to have the obligation to the lease elements. And then any attachments, this is usually added on the back side of the lease, but it'll include any, added languages, a plot plan, rules and regulation, and a work letter. And it could also include site plans, parking layouts, and detailed list of nets and camps. And then important, the last ones, we just wanted to note that all terms and clauses will be discussed in this webinar. Not all terms and clauses will be discussed in this webinar, so we strongly suggest that you get some legal representation. And so I think this is, we've reached our time on this. I want to thank you for sitting with us on this webinar or for this presentation, and I will end it here and give it over to Frank.
Elias, thank you. Lots of great information, thorough information, and good thing we recorded it because I think a lot of us will go back and rewind and play over several of those items. But great information. We do have some questions, so let's take a few of these questions and kind of build and clarify. So I'll just no particular order, but we had a question that came in. What do you feel is the most important when making an offer on a space between rent, deposit, et cetera?
So it's gonna depend on the landlord, and again, it'll be a case by case. But overall, they're all pretty equally important, but it depends on what the landlord wants. So, for example, if the landlord is looking for a great cash flow on a month-to-month income, then the most important thing will be the base rent, and that's to secure that he has the highest market value, that he is going to get paid for those areas. But to make him a little more comfortable, another landlord might say, well, I want a bigger deposit. I want to understand and make sure that you're going to be here, that you're not going to leave, and that this money is on the hook. So it might be important to give a higher deposit. But overall, I think it's going to come down to the terms, how many years you're going to offer, and the base rent. If you can get those two locked in and come to an agreement where it'll leave you happy and the landlord, he'll be getting paid the amount that he wants, and it's going to be for a great number of years, then that should overall steer the conversation on, hey, we're getting somewhere, we can make this work. You're at the terms and the years. Let's just see if we can kind of sort the deposit out.
Great. And then, maybe just to build on that, and may ask another question inside that. And you mentioned this in your presentation. Yeah, I know a couple of years ago, and I certainly there are cases of this as well, where landlords may be overcharging. Maybe considered predatory, where they're taking advantage of. Can you just comment on that? Because you mentioned in you said hold tight and don't overpay, but it was a tough decisions for lots of entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, no. So and I can give some examples too. And within the past month, everywhere we searched, most landlords think of a premium cannabis tax. They're like, well, they can afford it. They're in a lucrative business, but what they don't understand is there's so many regulations that come with the city that it is strenuous on the business, that starting off the business and getting charged something that another retailer won't even look at, it's pretty ridiculous. And so we say don't overpay, but there's still going to be some type of premium. And what we try to do is mitigate that risk, right? So one way you can do is when you're going to offer the landlord to kind of counteract that premium, you can come in at asking rate, right? It's like, hey, we're going to give you what you want. We want to give you what you want. It's at market rate. It's fair. It's what another retailer would pay for this space. And in turn, we'll give you the terms that you want. We'll give you the rate that you want, but we don't want that premium. We don't want that premium. We'll give you all your other terms. So going off the last question that you said, at this point, the rate could be the most important part. You want to combat not only for the landlord, but for yourself. You don't want to go in and if they're charging $3 a square foot, and this is something that just happened to us, is the asking rate was about $2.50. He came in and he asked for $4.50. And we right away said, no, we're not going to do that. What we can do is we can give you, a bit more of a deposit, because we know you're trying to mitigate your risks, but we can give you a bit more of a deposit, an extra month, an extra 2 months, which means that we're also risking that deposit. And that's where the premium usually comes in, is that they don't want to miss out on another tenant and have this space empty because we couldn't follow through with our promise or our permitting process.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, and kind of to build, and this is another great question. because not every landlord is comfortable, right, with cannabis as
Yeah.
operation. So how can I make a landlord feel at ease in taking a cannabis business as a tenant?
So a couple things you can do, and what I've seen people do is have some type of package prepared. And that package, it's going to include, the bio on what you do, your experience with cannabis. If it's a new endeavor for you, what experience have you had with other people? Where do you work currently, and how does that help your cannabis? The type of marketing you're going to do. And overall, just come with the corporate feel and a very friendly gesture. Meeting the landlord, they'll have the preconception of, well, cannabis is bad. But
Mhm.
no, that doesn't necessarily mean that. Once you meet the person, you see that it's like any other professional business, that we have our balances, in everything aligns with our balances. We have the performas that show that we're going to be making this much a month, and that he has nothing to worry. We have a community plan that we're going to reach out to the community, let them know we're here, have events that educate the community on what we do, and overall visit every tenant he has. Tell him, I'd love to introduce
Mhm.
myself. We're looking to put this here, but we want to create a synergy. How can our business help your businesses as well? And overall, let them know that you're bringing a ton of value. You're going to build out the entire space. It's going to look very nice, and it's going to drive lots of consumers to you. So making them comfortable with your use, giving a background on what you do, on who you are, and being calm and very nice with them, that goes a long way. We had a landlord that did not want it at all. He
Mhm.
hated the idea. He started negotiating with us. He then left, picked somebody else, and then he came back to us and said, "You know what? We've been discussing it. I'm cool with this use. I
Mhm.
don't mind trying." And now we were able to close a lease for them.
Yeah,
And
great.
so we made them very comfortable. It took us months. We were very patient, but we painted the picture on what we were doing with the community, what we were doing with his tenants, the improvements we were doing, and overall, it's the same as any other use.
Yep.
There's medicinal and health benefits.
Yeah. So I mean, great comments and clarification. I mean, business approach, you know, complemented with a lot of education, right? Because not everyone's educated and understands. So I think
Yeah.
great comments. And then Ronnie asked a question, kind of a build on this, but as social equity entrepreneurs approach these landlords, so the landlords don't understand a legitimate entrepreneur, with a social equity in a social equity program with the city of LA versus some of the illicit operators that have found their way and popped up in many
Yeah.
retail locations. Is there a
Mhm.
way that how do they differentiate and kind of prove and share with the landlord that there's confidence they're not an illicit operation?
Okay, so that's a great question. And this actually happened to us, where there was a landlord who said, "Hey, I'm okay with the use." But the last guy that I had here, he showed me a document, and that document said he was good to go, but it
Mm,
turns out it was a fake document. It was an illicit use. He got removed, and that the city was on him now. And I started telling my clients, the easiest way that you can do it is everything goes through the city of LA. You're part of the
mhm,
DCR, you're part of social equity, and there's tons of regulations you already have to go. So the easiest way is to show him, hey, this is the process I'm going. I'm at step one right now. These are the people that I'm talking to. It's with the city of LA, or it's with the DCR. I have the advisors. We have legal help. There's
mhm,
lots of regulations I have to meet. And also, there's a lot of sign-offs you have to do, whether it's the landlord attestation, there's, sometimes there's affidavits as well. And so it's showing him and walking him through the process you're currently going through, up to whether it's the provisional use or it's the accepted use, and show them that this came directly from someone who is tied in with social equity, and teach them what social equity means. It's a
mhm.
program that's run with the DCR. They help them, they have advisors, they go through a lot of process to understand the regulations. Why? Because they're going to spend a lot of money on this, and they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot either. So if they get familiar with, educate them who the DCR is, educate on what they have provided and the different resources they've provided, all the trainings you go through. I had tons of clients show me that they had different certifications from the
Mhm.
DCR, where it'll say, "Hey, I can do operations and management. I can sell," and this made the landlords very happy. It's like, "Oh, you are part of a program." And
Mhm.
again, we almost say, "Hey, visit DCR website. You'll see that this is a real program that's supported by the city." And so this usually brings a lot of calmness. And since they're going through the process and they see the document at the end that says, hey, signed off by the city, we have the, the city planner signed off of this. They saw their conditional use permits or the permits that they had, and it'll show that it is very real, that we are here and this is all allowed and approved.
Yeah, great response, and I think a great approach,
Mhm.
and appreciate the thoroughness of that response.
Yeah.
Yeah, because not everyone's familiar with the DCR's programs, and unless
Yeah.
you have some cannabis interest, right? The
Yeah.
general market, at least. Yeah, yeah,
And that's what we saw. Education was the biggest factor here.
yeah.
They have this preconceived notion that it's just bad, that's it. But it's like, no, it's like
Hmm.
any other product, and it's much more regulated than any other product. So if that's what your concern is, let me educate you. Let me
Yeah,
help you on why it is just like those things.
great.
Mhm.
Here's another question, and kind of a different on a different topic. And I'm very familiar with landlords, and they're all business people, and they certainly have choices to select
Mhm.
tenants that are worthy and secure and good
Mhm.
operators, and in all different industries. And as you know, many of these entrepreneurs are new on their journey, right? Regarding business. So what is the best way to establish credit from a tenant standpoint? And I know they look at credit, but you know, a lot of these entrepreneurs may not have that history that other successful business operators might have, right?
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest problems.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that tenants go in is that they were accepted into the program, but this is their first business
Hmm.
altogether. And you have to be able to massage that to the landlord. And it might take a couple of tries. And first of all, if you have a great credit score and you're able to kind of show off your balances and just show, hey, I'm financially stable, I can handle this, then that's going to be the easiest way. But more often than not, that's very hard because the landlord's going to say, well, you have a $10,000 a month rent. You're going to have to do the build out costs. How do I know you're going to have the credit worthiness? One thing I've seen is people, they'll either partner up with an investor that they're very, very comfortable that they've worked with a lot, and they'll have
Hmm.
them co-sign. At that point, it's almost like a no-brainer to the tenant. Well, he'll think, well, I have someone on the hook, right?
Hmm.
But there are not a lot of people are fortunate to find an investor or find some type of credit line. We started seeing that there's specific loan officers who can kind of do a pro forma with you and kind of establish, hey, although you don't have the credit, let me show you what you can do. You have a pro forma of this many people, you'll have this many consumers. This is what you will more than likely be making in month 1 through 10, and then year 2 to 3. Talking to the landlord and kind of showing them, hey, this is a new business, but it's very lucrative. These are my numbers. This is what I can do. If you can get them comfortable to the projections that you'll have, there could be a deal to be made. He can either tell you, hey, put a bigger deposit. I know that the credit's not that strong, but your pro forma shows that you have some pretty good projections. If you give me a larger deposit up front, then I'll allow you to come, without the financial credit. Because but what that also means is you now have a bigger risk of losing that money if you can't fulfill that financial endeavor. So just to kind of reiterate that, it's have a pro forma and show the projections that you'll have in the next year and get them very comfortable to that if your credit isn't very well established, or partnering up with a co-signer that's approved, that is on your side and is looking for your best interests as well.
Hmm. Great. And then there's a couple more that have come in on square footage.
Mhm.
This is all. I mean, we know there are retail operations of small, medium, large.
Yeah.
How do you go about that? I mean, you're going to find space, but it may not be the right size. Or I mean, what kind of metrics do you use to evaluate and make your decisions?
So a couple of things we like to look. So first of all, tenants have a hard time just finding any type of location right now, right? So they're going to give and take on the spacing sizes. So for now, what I've seen is they kind of just put the metric of I'll take anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. And they say,
Mhm.
well, it's because we see other shops do that. But is there a way to quantify that? The easiest way is to know how many employees are you going to start off with first, right? Let's say you're going to start off with 2 or 3 different employees. Now for them, let's try to give them a little bit space. Per employee, you might need anywhere between 100 to 150 square feet. So if you have 3, 4 employees, times that by 100, and that's going to give you 400 square feet right off the bat. And then on the type of products you're going to carry, are you going to have one type of product, or are you going to have tons of different products, right? And that retail space, it'll differ for everyone. But if you're going to have lots of merchandise on hand, you're going to need a bigger space. And what we suggest is, if you have a quick turnover rate, or you have a quick turnover, or you're projecting a quick turnover rate, first decide how many employees you're going to have. You're going to have 3 to 4, times that by 100, 150 square feet. You'll have your initial base. On the retail side is how many displays are you going to have? How many, how your build out is going to look, and try to allocate anywhere between 500 square feet to 1,000, but that can quickly change. So it's going to also have to decide, are you going for a small, medium, or large retail space? And again, that's going to dictate different things. But I like to start off with how many employees you're going to have. Let's secure that they're going to have enough space to go around in there. And then after, let's see, for every, overall, it's hard to quantify the retail side because we don't know how much merchandise you're going to have. But I've been seeing everything go between almost about 1,000 square feet for that retail size.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, we have to quantify it with, do you want a small, large, or medium sized space? And again, it's also going to dictate on the pricing, right? So if it's very high in pricing, you're going to just want to start off with a lower premise overall. You don't want to go into a large one.
Great, thank you. And let's take this last question from Ronnie, and it doesn't have a lot of information here, but it says, are we able to lease with our business entity? And I assume business entity, business name, or business structure they've created. I don't know if you can answer that without more information.
Yeah, no, that's actually a very common question we have, and that goes along with the guarantor, the guarantee. And we were talking about how well is your credit established, and on top of that, what is the financial stability of your business? So it is a brand new business, and it's going to depend completely on the landlord, right? How you approach him, how he discusses it with you. And the first thing he's going to do is, hey, let me see the business entity's financial strength. And if you can't show anything for that, then right off the bat, they're going to say, no, well, you're going to have to personally guarantee this. I don't want the business entity to do it. So you have to have some type of P&L or projection that could combat that. Hey, we're not, we're fairly new. I don't have 2 years of tax returns. This is a brand new business. I want them to do, I want them to guarantee this lease. I don't want it personally. And so you can either say they have this bank balance of this much money, and I think it should be suffice for the rent. At that point, it's going to be up to the landlord, like, you know what, that's fine. I'll take that. But if you don't have anything to show for it, it might be a little hard to have your business entity guarantee that. But again, it's going to completely be based on the landlord. What I have seen people do, though, is they'll say, hey, if it's a 5-year lease, I'll personally guarantee the first 2 years. But if it's very stable and you see that it's doing well, I want to be able to switch the guarantee to my business entity. So that's one way to combat it. Now, I know it's not fully pulling your business as the entity that's going to guarantee it, but at least it gives you a track to switch it back to it. So you can try to negotiate that up front. But overall, it's going to be the financial strength. If the business shows for it, then, awesome, let's get that on there. If it doesn't, if we can have some type of projection and show that, hey, they're the backing of this, it's going to be okay, then it's going to take some convincing with the landlord. But again, I had a landlord that just said, hey, if you think you can afford this rent, guarantee it with the business. And it's, again, case by case.
Yeah. Well, Elias, like always, we run out of time, but great information, great content. The information will absolutely save people time, and I'm almost positive it'll save them some money as well as they learn and follow some of your advice. So I want to thank everyone for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's learning management system within a few weeks after this presentation. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.scp@lacity.org. Thanks again for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.